You walk through a dimly lit cemetery, the wind stirring the mist around the tombstones. The night feels heavy, charged with stories left untold. The whispers of creatures that once walked among us. Vampires. Creatures of the night that haunt pages of folklore. Aren't just European myths. The United States has its own dark history with these beings. Tonight, we'll explore some of the most chilling vampire legends and cases from American history, starting in New England and ending in the haunted streets of New Orleans. Welcome back, guys. I'm Stone Rock. If you like what we do here, please like and subscribe. It goes a long way towards helping the channel out. I appreciate all of you guys who have liked and subscribed so far. You guys are awesome. Like, I honestly, I would not keep doing what I'm doing if it wasn't for the support from you guys. But we're going to get into it. We're going to start out with Mercy Brown from Rhode Island in 1892. Our first story takes us to Exeter, Rhode Island in 1892, at the height of the tuberculosis epidemic. The Brown family was no stranger to the tragedy. The father, George Brown, had already lost his wife and 2 daughters to a mysterious illness that left them pale and weak, unable to breathe. The locals call it consumption, but we know it today as tuberculosis. But before we dive deeper into Mercy's story, it's important to understand why tuberculosis, or TB, was so often associated with vampirism during the time. The link between tuberculosis and vampirism. So we're gonna go into a little bit of the history here. In the 18th and 19th centuries, tuberculosis was a terrifying and deadly disease. It spread quickly through families and communities, and in a time before modern medicine, the disease was misunderstood. TB affects the lungs, causing sufferers to cough up blood, lose weight, and become extremely pale and gaunt. Their appearances could change drastically, making them seem almost as if life was being drained from them. To those who witnessed their loved ones slowly deteriorating, it seemed as if something unseen, something dark, was feeding on them. But TB didn't just affect its victims. It spread throughout families. One person would fall ill and soon another would follow. Entire households would be wiped out by the disease. To the superstitious minds of the time, it wasn't just a contagious illness. It was something supernatural, a predator lurking in the shadows. They believed that one of the dead was rising from the grave at night and feeding on the life force of the living, slowly sucking them dry. This belief was bolstered by the way the disease often progressed. A person could appear healthy one week and be dead the next, while others in the family would suffer over a longer period, as though their energy was being taken bit by bit. In desperate attempts to stop the spread of what they believed to be vampirism, communities would exhume bodies of the recently deceased and look for signs of vampiric activities, such as fresh blood in the heart or body that hadn't decomposed as quickly as expected. If they found anything suspicious, they would perform rituals to destroy the vampire, often by burning the heart or reburying the body with special precautions. The fear of vampires wasn't just folklore. It was deeply rooted in the need to explain death and disease in a time before science could provide answers. Now, let's return to the Brown family and how these superstitions led to the infamous case of Mercy Brown. Yeah, a lot of the times, they would even break off the limbs from the bodies, and they would rearrange them in the coffins. A lot of the times, it was thought that if they had put the arms where the legs were, and the legs where the arms were, that the vampire wouldn't be able to walk and it would starve to death, which is extremely wild to me, but it makes sense, being as how, I live in modern times. My brain's not really able to comprehend that kind of thing because, I know about tuberculosis and all that other stuff. So, I mean, it makes sense that in a simpler time, people wouldn't really have experience, and that would be the first thing that they would leap to. There was also, I remember a story of, it was like a stone coffin that a guy was buried in, and it was sealed so tightly, and air and bacteria and stuff couldn't get into it. So it had appeared that the body hadn't decayed at all. It was over like a long period of time. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was on a, I want to say it was on one of those History Channel shows. Now, the History Channel is not some font of knowledge. They make up a lot more and have a lot more schlock TV than they probably should. but I said it was a story. We're gonna get back into Mercy Brown. When Mercy Brown, the youngest daughter, succumbed to tuberculosis, the townspeople grew suspicious. They believed one of the dead Browns was rising from the grave to drain the life force from the remaining family members. Mercy, whose body was buried in the dead of winter, became the prime suspect after her brother Edwin fell seriously ill, seemingly following the same fate as the rest of the family. 2 months after her burial, the townsfolk exhumed her body, but what they found shocked them. While the bodies were decomposing, Mercy Brown's body appeared unusually 2 months after her burial, the townsfolk exhumed her body. What they found shocked them. While the bodies were decomposing, Mercy's body appeared unusually well preserved. Her cheeks still had a rosy tint, and there was blood found in her heart. In their minds, this was undeniable proof that she was a vampire. To stop her from further preying on her brother, the townspeople cut out her heart, burned it on a nearby rock, and mixed the ashes into a tonic that Edwin drank. This was a common practice in vampiric rituals, as it was believed that consuming the ashes would break the vampire's hold on the living. Unfortunately, Edwin died shortly after, and the story of Mercy Brown spread as one of the last major vampire cases in New England. This wasn't an isolated incident though. Throughout New England, especially during times of tuberculosis epidemics, families often resorted to exhuming bodies and performing vampire rituals. These rituals were desperate attempts to explain and combat a disease that science couldn't yet understand. While the Mercy Brown case is perhaps the most famous, it wasn't the only instance of such practices in America. There are many other tales of exhumed bodies, strange rituals, and the belief that the dead were feeding on the living, especially during times of widespread illness. I believe it wasn't until here recently that like rural Romanian families were doing the same thing when they thought that they had a vampire on their hands. Like that practice of taking out the heart, burning it, and mixing it into a tonic was still happening over in like rural Romania and Transylvania and stuff like that. But you know, that's old world. That's where a lot of those kind of rituals started, believe it or not. I mean, of course we believe it. It's Transylvania. You know, it's the home of Vladislaus Dracul, right? It's interesting how cultures like that, you know, kind of mix stuff around, because that, you know, we had it here in New England, and that had to have come over from the old world. It's just interesting to me how stuff like that mixes. On to our next case. JB from Jewett City, Connecticut, 1854. About 40 years before the Brown family tragedy, another vampire panic gripped the town of Jewett City, Connecticut. The Ray family, like many others in the area, had fallen victim to a deadly disease that swept through their household. Members of the family died one by one, and the survivors grew terrified that something supernatural was at play. Locals, fearing a vampire, decided to exhume the bodies of the Ray family. Upon opening the graves, they found one corpse that had moved and appeared more preserved than the others. This body, believed to be the source of the family's woes, was identified only by the initials JB. In what was becoming a common ritual, townsfolk desecrated the body, either by burning the heart or reburying it in a way that would stop the creature from rising again. Their hope was that performing the ritual would prevent further deaths. When archaeologists discovered JB's remains in the 1990s, they found that the bones had been arranged in a way to prevent the body from rising, suggesting the fear of vampirism was real for these communities. Yeah, JB is the one most notably that had his legs were crossed up on his chest like that, and his head was like removed completely from the body. Our next case, the Carter brothers from New Orleans in the early 1900s. New Orleans, a city known for its dark, mysterious history, is also home to the tales of vampires. One of the most infamous stories involves the Carter brothers in the early 1900s. The brothers John and Wayne Carter were normal, by all appearances, working regular jobs in the French Quarter. But rumors about the Carters would soon reveal something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface. The story goes that a young woman found stumbling through the streets of the French Quarter claimed to have escaped the Carter brothers, where she and others had been held captive. The police, skeptical at first, decided to investigate. When they arrived at the apartment, they made a gruesome discovery. Multiple people were tied up, their wrists slit, and blood slowly draining from the bodies into buckets. The victims were still alive, but weak. It seemed the Carter brothers had been found feeding on their blood. The brothers were arrested, tried, and eventually executed. But the legend doesn't stop there. Years later, after their death, sightings of the Carter brothers persisted in the French Quarter. Some claim they never truly died, but then they were vampires and their spirits, or perhaps their bodies, continue to roam the city to this day. Now, this one is mostly legend, mostly speculative. It is what it is. That was a different time. Like I would love to have been, or love to have seen time period like that. All right, so this last one, this is a story that I've heard a couple times, and it's so fantastical. It's almost like a modern superhero movie. And this one, as far as I can figure, as far as my research took me, is purely legends, purely folklore, but it's so freaking awesome that I have to add it. This one, called The Catholic Priest and the Voodoo Priest Team Up, New Orleans, 1930s. Our final story brings us to the crossroads of faith and folklore in New Orleans in the 1930s. This legend tells of a Catholic priest and a voodoo priest who were forced to join forces to rid the city of a vampire. According to the story, a series of strange deaths began to occur in the French Quarter. The victims were found drained of blood, leading many to believe that a vampire was on the loose. As fear spread, both the Catholic and voodoo communities took notice. In a city known for its unique blend of religious practices, it wasn't uncommon for different faiths to overlap. But in this case, the Catholic priest and the voodoo priest were initially at odds, each claiming that only their rituals could vanquish the vampire. However, as more victims turned up, they realized they had no choice but to work together. The vampire was said to be hiding deep within the French Quarter, and it took a combination of Catholic exorcisms and voodoo rituals to finally trap the creature. Some versions of the story say that the vampire was staked and destroyed, while others claimed it was sealed in a coffin, never to rise again. This story exemplifies New Orleans culture and spiritual diversity. This cooperation between the Catholic and voodoo priest in this legend symbolizes how different beliefs often blend in the city, particularly when it comes to combating the supernatural. While the truth behind the legend is difficult to verify, it's become an essential part of New Orleans' rich vampire folklore. Yeah, that story to me is just like modern superhero stories, right? Like it's big and episodic. Like you could make a Netflix special about that, and it would pop off. Like it would be amazing. I would love to watch a TV show about that, or even just like a short film about that. That would be awesome. Vampires have always fascinated us. They're the misunderstood beings of modern fiction, or the terrifying creatures of legend. From the cold hills of New England to the vibrant streets of New Orleans, these stories remind us of our timeless fear of death and the unknown. Are these just myths born from superstition and disease, or is this something darker lurking in the shadows? What do you think? Let me know in the comments what you guys think of that. Let me know if you have any other vampire stories. Vampires are cool. Like vampires are one of those things that have always intrigued me since I was a kid, and I'm sure that a lot of you are the same way. Let me know. Maybe I could tackle some old world style vampires. There's a ton of stuff. I know I definitely want to do the Baba Yaga at some point. She's kind of a vampire witch thing, and she's got her house in the woods on chicken legs, and it moves through the woods. That's such an interesting story. But yeah, let me know down in the comments what you guys think. Appreciate you guys stopping by and checking it out. I think that's about it. Have a good day, guys. Worship me. I control the air you breathe. Worship me. My forgiveness sets you free.